So I would like to share some important information from the elders of Faith Bible Church. As you may know, Wayne is completing 23 years of ministry at Faith Bible Church as senior pastor and close to 40 years of pastoral ministry. A few years ago, Wayne and the elders raised the potential idea of what a pastoral transition would be for Faith Bible Church. In the past few months, the elders have begun to be more proactive in addressing this, and we want to keep you as congregation informed of this process. As we have worked with Wayne on the direction and a plan, we have formulated a proposal that we are moving forward on. The proposal is not retirement for Wayne, but instead a transition to another role in the life and the ministry of Faith Bible Church. This role will be more focused on resourcing the Faith Bible Church mission ministry and providing ongoing international pastoral training through both Faith Bible Church and Grace and Truth Ministries. Along with this focus, Wayne will remain a pastoral staff member with teaching, pulpit support, visitations and other pastoral responsibilities. This transition will create a vacancy for a pastor. Then also some background. A couple of years back, we moved to include an executive pastor position here at the church, and we have transferred a number of senior pastor responsibilities to that position. And this role is currently filled by Rick Bush. The decision to include this position has proven to be effective and enhanced the pastoral staff. And basically, it is our desire to maintain that position in place. With Wayne's new role, we will be adding an additional pastor to take over many of the remaining senior pastor responsibilities that Wayne currently holds. Over the next few months, we will be finalizing those roles and responsibilities, and with the Lord's help, search for that man. You may wonder about the matter of timing. We are under no pressure to act quickly. The current pastoral staff is working well together. Wayne is not seeking a quick change, nor are we. However, we do believe that this is the right time to begin the transition plan. We always knew this day would come, and we are blessed to be able to work it at a planned and thorough pace. So we will send this announcement via email this afternoon, and we'll keep you posted on a regular basis on the progress. One additional thought. We do realize that these kinds of transitions can prove to be difficult in the life of a church. However, we are trusting the Lord's guidance and wisdom as we move forward, and we believe that Faith Bible Church is mature enough as a body to navigate this transition. The elders covered your prayers. Should you have any questions, please reach out to your shepherding elder.
We shared some of the story news with our kids. The typical response we get from our daughters is this: "Daddy, are you dying?" And the answer is yes. I heard somebody say it. We all are. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said, look, the outer man is decaying, but the inner man is being renewed day after day. Unless you think it's only for old men like me, our family is a soccer family. We love soccer, and right now, football for me, but soccer for you. The European Championship started this weekend, Friday. Outside of the World Cup, the European Championships is the largest soccer championship tournament in the world. And yesterday, there was a match between Denmark and Finland. And right before halftime, one of the leading players in the world, 29 years old, Christian Eriksen, collapsed. Non-contact, collapsed on the field. Immediately, the medical team raced out onto the field and they worked on him for more than 10 minutes. CPR. The game was suspended. As you can imagine, the players were devastated, comforting his wife and his family on the field. He was taken to a hospital. Later, they reported that he had stabilized and was doing okay. Probably the end of his career. At the top of his game at 29 years old. The outer man is decaying. The inner man's being renewed day after day after day. This morning, the elders, as we were preparing for today, and it has been a preparation on their part, and what we thought of doing, and they asked me to do, was maybe to fill in some gaps and talk through a little bit about where we are and where we're headed, okay? I want you to take your Bible and turn to Ephesians chapter 4. Now, it is on the inside cover of the bulletin, but it's good if you have a Bible or whatever device you have to read it in its setting. Ephesians chapter 4, Paul has been talking about the victory of Christ, the victory that he had through his work that we just heard about, through his death and resurrection, and in keeping with ancient traditions, kings, when they were victorious, gave gifts. When they brought the spoils, they gave gifts to the people. And so Paul uses that imagery to talk about the gifts that he has given to his people, the church. And I want to begin at verse 11 and read through verse 16. And he gave some as apostles, and some as prophets, and some as evangelists, and some as pastor teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. And as a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. So about 23 years ago, this spring, I was in contact with the search committee from Faith Bible Church. We were living in North Carolina and began a process of the potential of moving here to Cincinnati. And as part of that dialogue with the pulpit committee and then the elders, we sent a number of different pieces of information. One of the documents that I sent to them was a philosophy of ministry that I had written more than 30 years ago, which was to give guidance to what I was doing and what I wanted to do throughout my life in ministry. And so the elders and the pulpit committee received that, so they knew where and how I had approached the ministry. That essentially is derived from this particular passage, Ephesians 4. In fact, when I came here, the very first series of sermons that I preached was from Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians 4, 5, and 6. And so where we are today, it really reflects a little bit of personal philosophy that comes from that philosophy of ministry. That philosophy doesn't begin with Ephesians 4. It actually begins with Matthew 28. Matthew 28 is that passage that we call the Great Mandate or the Mission Mandate or the Great Commission, where Jesus gives those words to his disciples and he says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And so the essence of that mandate is not just for the disciples, not just for those who were there, but something we believe is still true as a mandate for us. This idea of making disciples. And we hear a lot about disciple making today. But as I looked at that particular passage and then related to Ephesians 4, there are two observations I think sometimes get overlooked. When we start talking about making disciples, our first instinct is to think about conversions. To make a disciple is to bring somebody to faith in Christ as an individual and to have them converted. And yet what's interesting is when you look into the New Testament and you look at how the disciples themselves carried out that mandate, the emphasis is not on individual conversion. Now, it certainly involves people hearing the gospel, believing the gospel. When you get to the book of Acts, you know where the emphasis is placed? On the establishing of these believers into a community of people called churches. So there in Jerusalem itself, even as people were believing, what does it say? They were gathered together into the church. And then you see something similar in Samaria. Then you really see it in Antioch. And then when Paul goes out on his missionary journeys, as he carries the gospel, Paul goes into communities, he preaches, and what does he do? Establishes churches. Disciple making disciples to fulfill the mandate of Matthew 28, doesn't end with somebody putting their faith in Jesus. It's having them be a part of a community of believers called a church. Listen, in the New Testament, there are no Lone Ranger disciples of Jesus. Disciples of Jesus are part of churches. That mandate to make disciples is not just about the individual, it's about churches. The second observation is also interesting. You know, Paul never uses the term disciple. Paul doesn't talk about disciple making. Paul doesn't use the word disciple. You say, well, wait a minute, but that's the mandate Jesus gave. But Paul doesn't use it. Does that mean Paul was saying, no, we don't need to make? No. Paul uses other terms. He talks about maturity. He talks about growing. He talks about principles of sanctification. And he always does it in the context of a church. So when you come to Ephesians chapter 4, this in some way is what Paul's talking about, disciple making. It's the life of a church. Both individuals in the church who are growing and maturing in their faith, but it's also how a church matures and grows and is strengthened. And that's primarily how I see this passage and how it shapes therefore a philosophy of ministry. In verse 11, Paul says that in Christ's victory, he gave gifts to the church. And he says there, he gave apostles and prophets and evangelists, and then pastors, teachers, shepherds, teachers, which is a combined group. He's given these gifted individuals to the church. Now, apostles and prophets, he's talked about in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20, he said, they laid the foundation. And so apostles, prophets would eventually pass off the scene because you don't keep building foundations. You lay the foundation, then you build upon it. And so evangelists, this role of shepherd teachers, would continue. Very similarly, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and Paul talking about spiritual gifts, he uses the same idea. It's not so much the spiritual gift as this as a gifted individual. When he says, and first off, he says he gave apostles. Second, he gave prophets. Third, he gave teachers. Then miracle workers, and then other gifts. Paul says, look, there's a priority, apostles, prophets, teachers, for the building up of the church. These are the gifts that Christ has given. So if you don't mind, I've always thought of myself as God's gift to you. But notice, in Ephesians 4, the purpose of these gifted individuals is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. It's an equipping work. And so my philosophy has always expressed this, that every pastor's job is to work himself out of a job. To do the work equipping in the life of the church so the church builds itself up. And so over the years, that's what we've been doing. Equipping the church to do the work of the ministry. In particular, one of those things is in the leadership of the church. And Faith Bible Church is an elder-led church. I think that's biblical. I think the pattern that you see throughout the New Testament is a plurality of leadership, of elders who lead the church. Faith Bible Church is not a pastoral staff-led church. Faith Bible Church is an elder-led church. And the role that we've taken on is equipping the leadership of the church, the elders of the church. And when I came, we spent a lot of time doing that, investing in the leadership of the church. And we're at a point now that's exciting for me because that generation of elders is now passing the baton to another generation of elders. That's the mark of a healthy church. That's the mark of a mature church. When one generation of leadership is able to bring the next generation of leadership along. And we're there. We have a number of younger men who are now starting to assume the responsibility, realizing with that responsibility comes great accountability. It's not merely about a title. It's not about power. It's about shepherding the people of God. And they're doing it well. Not perfectly, but doing it well. Along with them, through the years, it's been exciting to see the addition of deacons. the deacons also now. You know, deacons come along after elders in the life of a church, and to come alongside in the ministry, and that's where we are, and we have wonderful deacons. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, what's interesting is that Timothy is in Ephesus years after this particular passage, and Paul is writing them, and in that passage he talks about elders and deacons, and this is what he says. He talks about qualifications for elders, and I think he has to spend some time talking about that. Is because the church at Ephesus had not done so well in the transition from one generation of leadership to another, and so now they were having to really focus in, and he's having to have Timothy help them identify that next generation. And then you see deacons, because the church is maturing, it is older, and so you see these groups. And so Faith Bible Church has elders, deacons, and trustees trustees no longer just the guys who do the cleanup after or the setups or whatever. The trustees of Faith Bible Church have assumed spiritual responsibilities, tremendous responsibilities, how they view their work here. And so as a leadership team, both elders, deacons, trustees, it's exciting to see the women, older women now and younger women in the ministry responsibilities here. And so as I look at the leadership of the church, the equipping of the saints to do the work of the ministry, we are in a good place. We're in a healthy place. A mature church. What Paul says, the mature man. And I know, again, our tendency is to think of individuals, but Paul uses the image of the new man to speak of the church. And then we have a staff. We have other gifted men that have come here and been a part of this church, helping, being a part of the equipping to enable us to be what God would desire Faith Bible Church to be. And so the elders have assembled that team to continue to help them in this ministry of building up the church. And we have a wonderful staff right now. Absolutely convinced they are God's gifted individuals that He's brought to this church. And so as I look at the maturity of a church, we see Faith Bible Church as being mature. Not perfect, but mature. In a position of health and strength, where it probably is a good time for now that working our way out of this role that I've had is a good time. As I look at this passage in Ephesians 4, and as I developed it in my philosophy of ministry, I said there are three elements that mark this mature church. And they are truth, relationships, and service. And you see them in this particular passage. Paul says, until we attain to the unity of the faith. The faith here is the body of truth, that which we believe, so that we're not tossed about by every wind of doctrine, not carried away like children, tossed here and there. And so Faith Bible Church is theologically sound, doctrinally grounded, at levels that run through the church, not just in the elders and not just in the deacons, but people throughout the life of the church who are theologically, doctrinally, biblically astute, discerning. grounded. People teaching in Sunday school, people discipling others, people who are involved in youth work and children's ministry, all through. People who are mature spiritually, theologically, doctrinally, not subject to the buffeting winds of the culture or the times, as challenging as they may be. And sometimes, even within the church, throughout my years in ministry, believe me, I've seen trends. I've seen fads, even in Christian circles and in churches. Newest things that come on the scene, and everybody has to believe and go that way. And sometimes they're fine, but if they're trends or fads, I can tell you that they're the most dangerous, because they end up undermining the authority of the Scriptures. Faith Bible Church is in a good place with regards to its biblical grounding. Secondly, the relationships. He said, you speak the truth in love. And then he ends, he says, look, for the body, the building of itself in love. That speaks of our relationships. Certainly, our emphasis is that we want people to love God. That's the first commandment, right? Love God with all your heart and soul, mind, and strength. But then he talks about loving one another. And beginning to love even unbelievers. Relationships with those outside. It's been exciting to see over the last couple of years some of the emphasis changing with regards to how we have local outreach, as well as the unreached and the global reach, and things like what we've seen this morning with the video, to something, how can we use that to reach our neighbors and our friends? The Metanoia Center and other local outreach type of ministry opportunities for us as a church. It's a sign of our growth. And then the service. That which every joint supplies, we're linked together, how we minister and strengthen one another. As I thought back through this year in particular, this year, everybody knows and everybody admits this year has been just one testing year in so many ways. It really has. It has tried churches. It's tried our church. But I think we have fared very well. I think the elders, leaders, those in leadership role have navigated this year wisely and have done a marvelous job navigating and helping us work through this year with the things that we've had to adapt to and change. And then it's been interesting because it's really come to the fore that we are not a centralized church. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we'd hear somebody has a need, especially through this year where you can't see people, you can't meet with people, and we try to say, oh no, let's reach out. And we try to reach out to somebody and they say, hey, we've already had somebody call us and check on us and provide food for us, and then you realize it's not just the elders, the deacons, small groups, people, just people in the life of the church caring for one another, reaching out, ministering to each other. It was amazing to hear the stories. It wasn't centralized by the office. It was organic. You did it. That's the sign of a healthy church. That's the sign of a healthy church, with the Spirit of God working in the hearts of people, growing, ministering to one another, even, as Paul says here, the whole body fitted and held together by what every joint supplies. And so, for me, as I look at the life of the church, where we are, and the strength and health of the church, I could say this part of my personal philosophy of ministry and my role, I think we're there. But there's another aspect that is also important. If I come back to that passage in Matthew 28, it's not just make disciples. Too often we stop there. The Great Commission is not make disciples. The Great Commission is make disciples of all nations. There's a mission component. And so, through the years, the elders have allowed me to be a part of a global mission emphasis in my life and ministry, providing opportunities to go overseas, to minister to people overseas, to strengthen churches, to strengthen pastors. The elders have granted that through the years. And over the last number of years, I've taken the opportunity, usually sometime around missions conference or whatever, to share something that I had adopted for myself. It comes out of John Piper's book, Don't Waste Your Life. If you've not read John Piper's Don't Waste Your Life, I'd really encourage you to read that. Towards the end of the book, John Piper asks this question: should I go on being a pastor? And as I read this, I could relate to this and said, this is my guidance too. He says, I try to take stock of my own ministry in this way. He said, every year at our church, we have a missions week. Preach on missions, we have guest speakers. He said, and every year, I re-examine my life as a pastor at this church. I look at what I'm doing in the light of God's global purpose, and in view of the incredible spiritual needs, I ask myself, is this the most strategic investment of my life for the sake of God's purpose to make the nations glad in Him? And so I've asked myself that over the years. He says, when the Lord calls me to give an account of my ministry in the last day, will I be able to say, Lord, I stayed at Bethlehem for Him, for me. I stayed at Faith Bible because I believed I could be the most instrumental there in accomplishing your purpose to make a name for yourself among the nations. When I can no longer say yes to that question, then my leadership here will be finished. Marv used to hate it when I went away to India. Because when I came back, he'd look at me and say, well, are you staying or are you going? One of the things that the elders have done in this transition, as you listen to Henry, is to say that they're providing for me an opportunity where I can stay at Faith Bible Church and expand my role in what God is doing among the nations, in missions. And so the transition for me allows me to continue to develop what I think is most strategic for me. There is something that needs some clarification. If you listen to Henry, he said that And you'll see this in writing, and this may then become a little more clear. It's to provide a resource along for the Missions of Faith Bible Church, but also to continue in something called Grace and Truth Ministries. If you heard that, you may be saying, what on earth is that? And so the elders asked me to explain that to you. So we'll do a little bit of explaining, okay? As I said, one of the great burdens that I've had is for training national pastors or encouraging other churches that may be under-resourced. 85% of the pastors in this world have no training. And it has been a burden that's been growing, and actually, my good friend brother, I call him brother, Troy Hassel, who many of you have met. Troy also, as we met, we began to develop and share this burden together. And we did some ministry opportunities together in order to meet that goal. A couple of years ago, an older gentleman in Bermuda who was an elder at the church that Troy has been pastoring, and somebody I've known since I was a teenager. He was one of our youth group sponsors at the time. Set up a fund that was to be used for missions, for expanding mission opportunities and trying to meet needs of people. That fund was set up in Bermuda, and at that time the regulations in Bermuda made it very difficult for those funds to be utilized in the right way. So the trustees of that fund approached Troy and I and asked us if we would be willing to set up a company in Bermuda that would then have access and utilize those funds for what we are wanting to do. And so we established a nonprofit company in Bermuda, which now has charity status in Bermuda, that those funds have been transferred to that company. That company is known as G&T. So you may not hear Grace and Truth, but you may hear G&T. It stands for Grace and Truth. And subsequent to that, we established also here in Ohio, here in the U.S., a 501(c) that is G&T US. The purpose of these funds is to be able to minister to pastors, to do training and education, to be resourcing for churches or pastors that we have come in contact with. And so, for example, the trips to Nicaragua that I have been able to do, Troy has been to Nepal, has been funded through G&T. And we currently are continuing with Nicaragua. We are, as we are able, we are working, developing a training program for Bermuda, working with a church in England, and then more recently with a gentleman in Rwanda who has been here. His wife was here last week, where 90% of the pastors have no training, education at all. And we are helping to set up a training center there in Rwanda. And so that G&T is a separate funding source for opportunities to go and resource others, minister to others, and to provide that educational piece and training piece. And so the elders have been very gracious through the years, and they're saying, as we go forward, that would be a continuing opportunity of ministry for me to do that through G&T. More than 40 years ago, I was still in seminary, I did a paper on one of my favorite characters in church history. His name was George Whitefield. Whitefield ministered in England, traveled extensively here in the U.S. He spent time in Bermuda. He was known as the great evangelist and the Great Awakening. And as I wrote that paper, I took as the thesis for the paper a statement out of his diary that then shaped, again, for me, has shaped my sense of ministry throughout the years. This is what Whitefield wrote. He said, "It is true, I have a difficult task, but God is all sufficient, to whose almighty protection I humbly commit myself. I give to him my soul and body to be disposed and worn out in his labors as he shall think meet." And that's where I'm at, is still got something to give, not fully disposed, worn out yet. But that we're at a point in time where the Lord may be shifting what it is that he has for me in the life of Faith Bible Church and beyond. And so if there's a time for us to do this transition, I really believe this is the time to do it. I will tell you, transitions after long tenures are difficult. But I believe that Faith Bible Church is strong enough, mature enough, and healthy enough right now with its leadership, with everything that's in place, to effectively make that transition in a way that continues us in our growth and development as a church. Listen, there are folks who are coming into this church and new or visiting, and you see sometimes hear that it's like, oh no, please don't feel that way. This church is strong. This church is healthy. This church is mature. And this church, not perfect, this church will continue on because of the foundations that's been laid and having been built upon by good people here. And so that's where we're at. And Henry said, we don't know how long this will take in the transition, but we're asking God to do his work. And remember that this is to grow up into Christ, who is the head. Christ is the head of this church. It's his church. Okay? And so we look forward to seeing what God's going to do.